Good morning, grade 12 learners. I am Ms. Sanda, subject planner for life sciences in the Eastern Cape. Today I'm going to be looking at the human nervous system, which is part of the topic responding to the environment in humans. Before we start with the lesson, let us look at the examination guidelines to see what are we supposed to be covering under that. And in the examination guidelines, if you can have a look there, you will see that the topic that we are looking at, which is responding to the environment in humans, with a special focus on the human nervous system, it is a topic that is done in term 2 over a period of 4 weeks. It is assessed in paper 1 for 40 marks. Now, as you can see, that is a lot of marks, meaning that out of 150, 40 marks will come from this topic. And also to note that this is also one of the topics where the learners are often having challenges with, especially the questions that involves application of what you have learned in class. So in the lessons that is coming up, you must pay attention to the presenters that will be presenting those lessons, because they will deal with such questions of application. Now, my lesson is only an introductory lesson to the topic of nervous system. Now, if you look here, the sequence of the content that I am going to cover in this lesson is not exactly the same as what is in the document or what is in the examination guidelines, but I've put together the linking information so that we can do it all at once, and you can see the links in this question or in this topic. Now let us look at the exam guidelines. Now the introduction, it says we must look at the nervous system, which involves the nerves, as well as the endocrine system, which involves as the hormones, just as an introduction, as two components that help us to respond to the environment. Now, the endocrine system is a chapter on its own. It's going to be done after we have finished the whole of human nervous system. Then we must look at the human nervous system and the need for a nervous system in humans, as it is outlined here, that of reaction to stimuli, which can be external or internal, or the coordination of the various activities of the body. Then we must look at the peripheral nervous system, location, where is it found in the body, as well as the functions of that peripheral nervous system by looking at the cranial and the spinal nerves. We must also look at the autonomic nervous system, which you will see in my diagram that I'm going to show you on the next slide, that the autonomic nervous system is actually a subdivision of the peripheral nervous system. So here as well, we will look at the location and the functions of the autonomic nervous system, and also look at the sympathetic and parasympathetic division. Finally, we will look at the structure and the functioning of a nerve, looking at functions of the sensory and motor neurons, as well as the structure and functions of parts of the sensory and motor neurons using diagrams. What it means using diagrams, it means that you must be able to draw the diagram. You must be able to label the parts of the diagram. You must be able to give the functions of the parts of the diagram. Now, if you look here in the examination guideline, it highlights the parts of the neuron that you are supposed to know. As you look in different books and resources from the internet, you will see that there is a lot of labels that you can label on the neuron. But you are only asked to know the labels of the nucleus, the cell body, the cytoplasm, myelin sheath, the axon, and the dendrites. You are only required to know those. It doesn't mean that you cannot learn about the other ones, but those are the ones that you are required to know for examination purposes. So now let us proceed and look at the introduction to the nervous system. Now, if you recall, in the early grades, you learned about the different or the 7 characteristics of life, or the 7 characteristics that living beings have. One of those characteristics was that of being able to respond to stimuli, or to respond to the changes in the environment in order for you to be able to survive. So it doesn't matter whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal, all living organisms must be able to respond to the environment in order to survive. Now, if we look specifically at humans, we have got 2 coordinating systems which allows us to adapt to the changes within the environment and then maintain our internal conditions. So if I can make an example here, in winter, the temperatures get very cold. But if you were to take your own body temperature and you are well and you've got nothing wrong in your body temperature stays the same. So we are saying that in your body, you have got 2 coordinating systems which will make sure that your internal environment is maintained at a constant level and you are able to adjust to changes in your internal or your external environment. And these 2 systems in humans are the nervous system and the endocrine system. Now, what is the difference between the nervous system and the endocrine system? The nervous system is made up of nerves and is a fast responding system. Now, let me just give you an example of a situation where you are using your nervous system. Now, if, for example, you accidentally touch a hot plate or a hot stove, the usual reaction is that you will immediately withdraw your hand from that stove. Very fast. It happens very fast. And that is obviously, if all your nerves are working properly, you will respond that way. So it's in a matter of seconds, if it's not milliseconds, that you are responding to a particular change in your environment. So that is how your nervous system works. Then your endocrine system, it involves hormones, which are chemical messengers in your body. They take messages from one part of the body to the other. And these hormones are released into the blood. And because the blood has to travel throughout your body to get where it's supposed to go, then this system is a very slow system, but it has got long-lasting effects. So the endocrine system, it works via hormones which are released into your blood, and it is a much slower responding system. Now, we are not going to be looking at the nervous system or at the endocrine system now. We will look at it in the next chapter. So we will focus on the nervous system. Now, let us look at how is the nervous system organized. Now, if you look at this flow diagram, you will see that the nervous system is divided into 2 parts, which is the central nervous system as well as the peripheral nervous system. So those are your 2 main divisions of the nervous system, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Now, the central nervous system, I'm going to talk about it very briefly because the next presenter in the next lesson on Thursday will be looking in detail into the central nervous system. Now, your central nervous system is made up of your brain and your spinal cord. Now, when something is central, it means that it's in the center. Now, if you look at your brain and your spinal cord, they are like in the center of your body, and they are the center of information in your body. So I will not talk much about the central nervous system. The next presenter will talk about that. Then the peripheral nervous system is what we are going to focus on today. And as you can see in my flow diagram, you can see that your peripheral nervous system has got, or it is further subdivided into the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. Now, under each of these nervous systems, I have written in brackets, under autonomic, it is involuntary, and then under somatic, it is voluntary. Now, these two terms, voluntary and involuntary, they are not new to you. In grade 10, you learnt about different types of muscles, your skeletal muscles and your smooth muscles and your cardiac muscles. Now, if you remember, your skeletal muscles, those are the muscles that are attached to your bones, and anything that you do with your skeletal muscles, it is controlled by your own will. If I take a pen and I start writing, or if I stand up and I start walking, I know very well that I am doing that. It's under my conscious will. So a voluntary activity is an action or activity that is controlled by one's will. And then your autonomic division, it is an involuntary activity. Or it is responsible for coordinating involuntary activities. Now, involuntary, it means that those activities, they are not under one's conscious will. So, let us think of an example. I am sitting here now. I am talking. I'm doing everything with my hands. I know what I'm doing with my hands. But inside my body, I've got my heart, which is made up of the cardiac muscle. As I am talking, the heart is beating, and I have got no control whatsoever on the way that muscle is contracting and relaxing for me to be able to breathe. To pump blood in my body. So that action of the cardiac muscle is not under my conscious will. It happens automatically. So hence we refer to that action as being an involuntary activity. Now, so that is the autonomic nervous system. Now, if you look at the autonomic nervous system, you can see that it is further subdivided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Now, again, this should not be new to you, because in grade 10, you looked at the structure of the heart, you looked at the regulation of your heartbeat, or conduction and regulation of your heartbeat, and you should have come across the sympathetic nerves, which are the ones that are responsible for speeding up your heart rate, and then your parasympathetic nerves, which are the ones that are responsible for slowing down your heart rate. So you can see that these two systems, they are working involuntarily, and they are bringing about involuntary activities in your body. Your heart rate increases. You don't control if you want your heart rate to increase. It happens automatically. For your heart rate to decrease, it doesn't get controlled by you. So sympathetic will speed up your heart rate, and then your parasympathetic will slow down. So if you look at what is the difference between these two, you will see the other one, where it increases your heart rate, it's more like having an arousal function or an excitatory function in your body. Whereas your parasympathetic is there to restore everything and bring everything back to normal. We will further explain in the slides that is coming up. Now let's look at generally what is the nervous system and how it actually works. Now, as we have already mentioned, all our bodily activities, whether they are voluntary or involuntary, they are controlled by the nervous system. Therefore, we can think of the nervous system as the body's control and communication center. It works in this way. There are receptors which are in our sense organs, and these receptors, they detect stimuli from the environment and then convert these stimuli into nerve impulses. Now, nerve impulses, they are like electrical messages which are transmitted by the specialized cells called neurons to the central nervous system or the brain and the spinal cord, where they will be interpreted, and then from the central nervous system, the impulses will be carried to the effectors, which is either your muscles or your glands, which will then respond to the changes or the stimuli and allow for the response to those changes to take place. Now, in this slide, I'm trying to explain all the terms that we have come across in the previous slide, because it is very important, grade 12 learners, to know your terminology. It is a question 1.2 in each exam or test is the question that is asked on terminology. And in the exam, the question, you can be asked up to 10 terms from different topics. So it's very important that you keep a book or a notebook where you write all the terms that link to that particular topic so that it is easier for you to remember. So let us look at the terms that we have mentioned in the previous slide. We have come across the term receptor. What is a receptor? A receptor is a structure that receives a stimulus and converts it into an impulse. Where do you find the receptors in your body? Your receptors are found in your nerve endings. They are also found in your sense organs. So if you think about sense organs in the body, you've got your skin, you've got your eyes, you've got your ears, you've got your tongue, etc. So they have got different receptors which respond to different stimuli. Like, for example, in your skin, you have various receptors there. You have touch receptors in your skin. If I touch you, you will respond. If you also have pain receptors in your skin. So if something causes you pain, it will be felt by receptors, or it will be detected by receptors in your skin. You have heat receptors as well as cold receptors in your skin. So as I said, your skin has got many different types of receptors. In your eyes, you respond to light. So the light that enters your eyes, it is what helps you to be able to see different objects that you are looking at. So sometimes the light can be too much, or sometimes the light can be too little. So your eyes have to respond, and the receptors in your eyes, they are the ones that will receive that stimulus, that there is too much or there is too little light in your eyes. Ear, you've got receptors in your ear which help you to be able to hear sound. Then the other term that we've come across was the effector. If I effect something, or let's say we do something, you write an essay, then you're writing a research project, you take it to someone to check it, and they write some changes that you have to make. Then we always say that we refer to that, we say that you must effect these changes. It's like you must respond to these changes. So the effector is a structure in the body that responds to a stimulus. The stimulus is going to be explained in the next term. Is like a change in your environment, which is either external or it is inside your body. So the structure in your body that then responds to that stimulus is referred to as an effector. Examples of effectors is your muscles and your glands. Then the third term is the stimulus. In plural, we refer to them as stimuli. And the definition of a stimulus is that it is a detectable change in the internal or external environment. For example, if we can think of some internal stimuli, a change in your body temperature, whereby you can have a higher body temperature than normal. If you're thinking about the coronavirus, one of the symptoms is that of having a high body temperature. Hence, when we are being screened, they first check if our body temperature is at a normal level. So normally your body temperature should be around 37 up to 37.5. If it gets to 38 degrees, then it is very high, and it means that your body will not be functioning at the level at which it is supposed to be functioning. Hence, when you are having fever or high body temperature, you don't feel well at all because it affects your enzymes, etc. Water levels, you can have too much or too little water in your body. Maybe you've eaten salty food, then it takes out some water from your body, and therefore your body has to respond to that. Sugar levels, which sometimes can result if they are left to be too high and your body is not able to control your sugar levels, you can end up having diabetes. So those are all the changes. Too high sugar levels, too low sugar levels. That is an internal change that happens inside your body. External change or external stimulus could be pain. If I tread on a thorn, that is going to make me feel pain. So it's a change. That prick by a thorn is the stimulus. Environmental temperature, meaning that the temperature outside, in the outside environment, if we're thinking about winter now, your temperatures are going to be lower than your body temperature. In some places, they can go very low up to the minus degrees. So even though your environmental temperature is going to go low or too low, then your body temperature still stays at the level at which it's supposed to be, which is about 37.5 degrees. Hence, we are talking about coordination of body activities so that we can maintain a constant internal environment. Touch, danger, etc. So all of those are examples of external stimuli. Then the impulse. We mentioned that the receptor, it detects or it receives the stimulus and it converts it into an impulse. So what is an impulse? An impulse is an electrochemical message which is transmitted by the nerves or the neurons. That means that you receive this change from the environment, then it gets converted into an electrical message which is going to be transmitted or carried by your nerves throughout the body to the required parts of your body. Then we talked about neurons, where we said neurons, they are the specialized cells in your nervous system that are responsible for transmitting impulses. So they can transmit these impulses from the receptors to the central nervous system, or from the central nervous system to the effectors. So they are like the channels through which the impulses or the messages are sent between your body and your central nervous system. So that is your neurons, which carry impulses between your body and your central nervous system. Now, what are the functions of the nervous system? Now, the main functions of the nervous system is that it helps to detect the changes in the environment and thus allows the body to react to these changes. Secondly, it allows for coordination of the various activities of the body. like as I mentioned, the coordination of your body temperature is done by the nervous system. So if we can look at this diagram, which basically illustrates the functioning of your nervous system. Here you can see all the different parts or the terms that I used in the previous slide. So the first thing with the functioning of your nervous system is the detection of the stimulus. What detects the stimulus? It is the receptors which are found in your sense organs. Hence, we are talking about sensory receptors. Now, what do the receptors do with the stimulus? The receptors convert that stimulus into an impulse. Now, that impulse, which is an electrochemical message, it is then transmitted or it is carried to your central nervous system. As you can see here, there's your central nervous system, and it consists of your brain and your spinal cord. So the impulses, they get transmitted to your central nervous system from the receptors via or by the sensory neurons. And then from the central nervous system, as you can see, it says processing in the brain. Meaning that in your brain, that is where all the information that is brought by the sensory neuron, it is integrated, it is processed so that it can work out what is the response that you have to have to this particular change in your environment. Then from the brain or the spinal cord, the information or the impulses will be taken out or will be transmitted by the motor neurons, which form part of the peripheral nervous system, as you will see later on. And then these motor neurons, they send these impulses to the effectors. In this example, it shows you a muscle in the leg of a person, which that effector is what will then bring about the response. For example, let's think of an example. Myself, I am terrified of rats or mice. So immediately I see a rat. Remember I said I see. So seeing or the stimulus, there will be the rat that I am seeing, which I am scared of. Then I use my receptor to detect that stimulus. There is a mouse. And then me, being the one who is scared of a mouse, the information is going to go to my brain via the sensory neurons. The brain is going to process what I've just seen. It is a rat or it is a mouse that you are scared of. And then the brain is going to tell me, you either jump and get on top of a chair or get on top of the bed to run away from this mouse. So therefore, that is processed in the brain. But then the information from my brain is going to be taken out of my brain by the motor neurons, which will then send that information to the muscles in my leg, and then I'm able to jump, which is the response that I'm going to do in response to having seen that rat or that mouse. Okay, so that is just an example there of how your nervous system functions. So next is now we need to look in detail into the peripheral nervous system. Now you will remember that I said that the central nervous system is going to be dealt with by another presenter in our lesson on Thursday. So what is the peripheral nervous system? Remember, we are supposed to look at the location as well as the function of the peripheral nervous system. Now your nervous system, your peripheral nervous system is all the nervous tissue that is found outside of your central nervous system. So it's outside of the brain and the spinal cord. Any nervous tissue that is found there is the peripheral nervous system. So periphery refers to outside. So what is it made up of? It consists of 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Now, cranial comes from cranium. Where is the cranium? Remember your skull, you've got the cranium, and underneath your cranium, you've got the brain, which will be explained in the next lesson. So all the nerves that come out of your cranium, and you've got 12 pairs of them, those form part of your peripheral nervous system. Then we have also 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Now, the spinal nerves are those that project out of the spinal cord, which runs through your backbone or your spine. Now, all of these nerves, they form a communication network all over the body. Remember, I said that in your peripheral nervous system, you've got the motor neurons. Your motor neurons, basically, as well as the sensory neurons, they are the ones that link to the different parts of the body, and therefore your body is able to respond to all the changes that take place. So that is the peripheral nervous system. Now, let us look at this diagram. Now, this diagram, it just gives you an overview of what each division of the nervous system consists of. If you look on the left-hand side, it shows you the central nervous system. And in the diagram, it is the areas that are colored in dark orange. At the top here, we've got the brain. And then we have the spinal cord that runs through your spine inside your vertebral column. And as you will see here, it says that your central nervous system, it contains connector neurons or interneurons. You will learn about the different neurons just now, but you must just remember that in your brain or your spinal cord, you will have these interneurons. Then in the peripheral nervous system, it is composed of cranial nerves. Remember, we said there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And then you have, as you can see in this diagram, there's your cranial nerves there in that area. And then you have your spinal nerves, which are the ones that project out of your spinal cord. So those are your nerves making up the peripheral nervous system. You have got 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Now, your peripheral nervous system, it contains of the sensory neurons as well as the motor neurons. We are going to look at the functions of these different types of neurons in the slides that's coming up. Now, let us look further into the organization of peripheral nervous system. Now, if you look here, you will see that the peripheral nervous system is divided, as we mentioned earlier on, into the autonomic nervous system as well as the somatic nervous system. Now, let's start with the somatic nervous system. Your somatic nervous system, it carries information from your sense organs to the central nervous system, and also from the central nervous system to the skeletal muscle. And it's basically responsible for voluntary activities or coordinating voluntary activities. Remember, we said skeletal muscles, they are voluntary muscles. Whatever you do with them is under your conscious control or under your conscious will. So the somatic division is responsible for coordinating functions that are voluntary. Then the autonomic nervous system, it regulates the internal environment so that homeostasis can be maintained. Now, in grade 11 already, you've come across the term homeostasis, which is the maintenance of a constant internal environment. You will remember in grade 10 when you were looking at the control of blood sugar, that is when you did homeostasis. When you look at the regulation of water levels in your body when you were doing excretion, that was another example of homeostasis. So you can see that the division of the nervous system or the peripheral nervous system, that is responsible for bringing about that constant internal environment is your autonomic nervous system. It says here that it carries information from the central nervous system to your smooth muscles and your glands. Remember, smooth muscles, you can't really control what is going on there. If you think about where you find it in your intestines, nothing you can control that is happening there. Even peristalsis that happens in the parts of your digestive system, you cannot control. It happens automatically because in those areas we find smooth muscles. So it carries information from your central nervous system to the smooth muscles and your glands, and therefore it is responsible for involuntary activities or coordinating involuntary activities. Now let us move further with the autonomic nervous system. Now if you look at your autonomic nervous system, you will see that it is further subdivided into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, if you look under sympathetic system, I said that it has got an arousal effect, or it has got an excitatory effect. Now, when do these systems come in place? Now, if you are faced with an emergency situation, your sympathetic division is the one that is responsible for the fight or flight action during an emergency situation. Now, for example, if you think about some people, if they are faced with danger, they will freeze and not know what to do. Or they might charge for the enemy and want to fight. So they might fight or they might run away. So that is the sympathetic division. It gives you that action of fight or flight action in an emergency situation. Whereas your parasympathetic division, it's the one that restores everything back to normal after you have been in an emergency situation. Let's say I am faced with this rat that I am afraid of, and my initial reaction is going to be run away from this rat. During this process of me having to run away, my muscles have to firm up so that I can have all the strength to use my legs for running. In order for my muscles to firm up, I need to have more blood pumped into my muscles so that I can have all the oxygen and all the energy that I need to run. So for that blood to be pumped, my heart rate needs to increase so that it can pump the blood faster. So those are the actions that you are going to get with your sympathetic nervous system. It helps you to deal with any emergency situation. You will come across this again when you are looking at the endocrine system and you are dealing with the hormone adrenaline. So sympathetic, it's arousal, excitatory in effect. It's responsible for fight or flight action in an emergency situation. Whereas your parasympathetic division, it restores everything back to normal state, or it brings everything to rest after an emergency situation, and therefore it has got this calming effect. That means that if I had this heart rate increasing because of all the being scared and all the actions that had to take place in my body, so when now I am out of that danger, the parasympathetic system is the one that is going to bring down my heart rate and all the other things that change during that emergency situation. So something you need to note about the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions is that they work antagonistically to each other. The term antagonistic, it's not the first time you are hearing of it. In grade 10, when you were looking at the muscles, we talked about muscles contracting and relaxing, and they work in opposite ways, meaning that when the one muscle contracts, the other one relaxes. So here, if you look at how the sympathetic divisions work, it's got an arousal effect, whereas the parasympathetic has got a calming effect, meaning that those effects are opposite to one another, and therefore we say that they work antagonistically. Now let us just look briefly. I'm not going to talk too much about this one because you will come across it again when you are looking at the role of adrenaline in the body, which it links with this autonomic nervous system in its function. Now we said that the sympathetic nervous system, it mostly has a stimulating effect, whereas your parasympathetic nervous system, bringing everything down to or back to normal, it has an inhibitory effect. One of the actions brought about by the sympathetic nervous system is that it will increase your heart rate, whereas your parasympathetic division will decrease your heart rate. As I've explained, why you would need to have your heart rate increase, because your heart has to pump more blood to your muscles for you to be able to run as fast as you can, or you can fight if you have to fight, and so on. It also constricts many arteries. Constricting, it means that it narrows your arteries. They become smaller, or they have a smaller diameter, meaning that the pressure of the blood is going to be higher, which forces the blood to be pumped to a bigger distance, or it decreases your heart rate, and so on. So also another important one is that during an emergency situation, you have to see clearly. So one other effect of the sympathetic nervous system is that it dilates your pupils. Your pupils become bigger. You will learn when you are looking at the structure of the eye, what is a pupil? It's like that hole in the middle of your eye. That is where the light actually enters your eye. So when you are in an emergency situation, you have to see. If you have ever looked at someone who is scared of something and look carefully at their eyes, you will see that the eyes, they like pop up like that. The pupils, they get dilated, they become bigger, so as to allow you to be able to see clearly. And the opposite effect of that by the parasympathetic nervous system is that it constricts the pupil. That is, your pupils become smaller, or narrower, and therefore restricting the light that enters your eyes. So I'm not going to go through everything that is listed in that table, because it will be dealt with more when we are looking at the functions of adrenaline. Now let us look at the functions of the peripheral nervous system. Two functions only is that it transmits impulses from your receptors to the central nervous system via the sensory neurons. Secondly, it transmits impulses from your central nervous system to the effectors via the motor neurons. We are going to look at the different types of neurons just now. So we have finished looking at the structure. We have finished looking at the peripheral nervous system, where it is located. We said it is located outside of your central nervous system. It's all the nervous tissue outside of your central nervous system. We have looked at the functions as well as the divisions of the peripheral nervous system. Now let us look at the structure and the functioning of the nerves, which form part of your peripheral nervous system. Sorry. Now, if we look at the nerves, they are actually made up of bundles of nerve fibers that are held together by connective tissue. So when you have a nerve and you look in cross section, you will see that there are nerve fibers that are making up that nerve. Now, furthermore, your nerve fiber is in turn made up of specialized nerve cells, which are called the neurons. So we've already spoken about neurons and how they carry nerve impulses or electrical impulses through the body. So you've got your nerve, which is having nerve fibers, and the nerve fibers are further made up of neurons, which carry the impulses through the body. So now, if you look at this organizational of the nerve, you will see that your neurons, they are like this, the smallest unit of the nerve. So your neurons are therefore regarded as the structural units of nervous system, meaning that they form the structure of your nervous system. So if you look at this flow chart here, it's showing you the organization there in your nervous tissue. You get the nerves, which are made up of nerve fibers, which are then made up of the smallest units or smallest cells, which are called the neurons. Now let us look at the neurons. We have got three different types of neurons, namely the sensory neuron, the connector or the interneuron, as well as the motor neuron. So those are the three types of neurons. Now let us look at the function of each of these neurons. Now the sensory neuron, it carries the impulses from the receptors, which can be found in your sense organs, and it carries these impulses to the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. So your sensory neuron, it starts at the receptors, carrying impulses from the receptors to your central nervous system. Then the connector or the interneuron, it carries impulses inside the central nervous system. If you remember the slide that I showed you, which was comparing the central nervous system, the diagram, and the peripheral nervous system, we said the central nervous system, it contains of connector or interneuron. So those are the neurons that are found within the central nervous system itself, and they basically connect the sensory neurons and the motor neurons by taking the information from the sensory neuron, interpreting information. Once it's interpreted in the central nervous system, then take that information to the motor neuron. Then lastly, we have the motor neuron, which carries the impulses from the central nervous system to your effector organs, which is your muscles and your glands. So if we can just summarize how the information flows through your body, the first thing that happens, there is a change in the environment, whether it's internal or it is external, and that change is referred to as a stimulus or stimuli in plural. And from the stimulus, this change is then detected by the receptor. So the receptor receives the stimulus. The receptor, we said, it's either in your sense organs, it will be in your eye, it will be in your ear, in your skin, etc. So it receives the stimulus or this change in your environment and converts it into an impulse, which is then transmitted by the sensory neuron to your central nervous system. It may be taken to your brain or it may be taken to your spinal cord. And inside your central nervous system, you've got the interneurons or the connector neurons, which carry impulses between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. That is, they will take impulses that were received via the sensory neuron in the brain or spinal cord, and they take them to the motor neuron. Your motor neuron transmits impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors. Your effectors are your muscles and your glands, which are able to bring about the required response. So now that is the different types of neurons and their functions. Now let us look at the structure of the neurons Now, as you have seen, we have got 3 different types of neurons, but all neurons, they are made up of 3 basic parts, namely the cell body, the dendrites, and an axon. So this is the diagram of the neuron, which you may be asked to draw in an exam or the test. You may be asked also to give the functions of that of the different parts of the neuron. Now, if you look at the different parts in the structure of the neuron, we have the dendrites, which are responsible for transmitting impulses towards the cell body. So if you look at this diagram, there is your dendrites. These are like those little fibers that are projecting out of this cell body, and they are the ones that are responsible for carrying or taking impulses towards the cell, or they bring impulses towards the cell body of the neuron. Now the cell body, as you can see here, it's this part of the neuron. And if you look at the cell body, you will see that inside where there are those dots there, you have the cytoplasm, and also you have the nucleus of the cell. As you will know that the nucleus is having all the genetic material of that cell, and therefore the metabolism of the cell is controlled in the in the cell body. So your dendrite carries impulses towards the cell body. The cell body has a nucleus, and therefore it is responsible for controlling the metabolism of the cell. So there's your nucleus highlighted there in blue. Then we have the axon. Now if you look at this cell body, you've got one other fiber that is projecting out of the cell body, and it is a very long fiber. So that one is called an axon. I've highlighted it in green, so it is that fiber inside those things that looks like donuts outside. So the axon transmits the impulses away from the cell body of the neuron. And if you look now around the neuron, there is a part called the myelin sheath. Now the myelin sheath, if you look at this diagram, it is the part which insulates the axon, and it helps with the speeding up of the transmission of impulses. That means that it results in fast conduction of the impulses. So without that myelin sheath, it means that the impulses would take very slow to get to where they are supposed to be taken. And also, in addition to that, the label is not mentioned there, but just for you to know, because it links up later on with one of the diseases that we are going to be talking about. So the myelin sheath is actually enclosed by a membrane. So there's a membrane on the outside here which encloses the myelin sheath. Inside that membrane, you get the myelin sheath, and that membrane is called the neurolemma. It helps to repair the damaged neurons. So there is the thing for the myelin sheath. Okay, so the myelin sheath is there, also highlighted in green, like the axon, because it basically forms part of the axon. It surrounds the axon and it insulates the axon, and therefore allowing for fast transmission of impulses. Hence, we said that the nervous system is a fast responding system. So that is the structure of the neuron. Now here we are going to look at, now we said that the neurons are able to transmit impulses, but these impulses, they move from the one neuron to the other neuron. So let us look at how are the impulses actually transmitted from one neuron to the other? This is a diagram we are going to show how the transmission of neurons occurs. It shows something very important that you need to know, which we refer to as a synapse, which I'm going to be talking about just now. Now, for the transmission of nerve impulses, there is more than one neuron involved when the neurons carry the nerve impulses. That means that the impulses must move from the one neuron to the other neuron. Now, if you look at the structure of your neuron, the axons, they have got terminals at the end, which we refer to as the axon terminal. So this is the end of the axon of one neuron. Now, inside that terminal or axon terminal, you will see there are like little circles or vesicles. And as you can see here, you see that those vesicles can come to the surface of the axon terminal and they release these purple dots here, which are indicated as neurotransmitters, into this gap that you see over here. We are going to say what is the gap and what is the importance of that. So the axon terminals of one neuron, they lie next to the dendrites of the next neuron. So on this side here with the lighter blue, it shows the dendrite of the other neuron. So we have the axon terminal and the dendrite of the next neuron. So that is how the impulse is going to be passed. Now, as you can see in this diagram, you can see that the axon terminal is not touching the dendrite of the next neuron. So therefore, there is they are not directly connected to each other, and therefore there is a small microscopic gap between the axon terminal of the one neuron and the dendrite of the other neuron. And this is necessary for the transmission of impulses between the two neurons. Now that microscopic gap, if you see here, I put a bracket to show that this whole area that is white here with the little purple chemical substances is called or it is referred to as a synapse. Remember, I put in brackets here gap. You can't label it as a gap. It's called a synapse, but I was just putting a gap there to show you that when I talk about the synapse, I'm actually referring to that microscopic gap between the axon terminal of the one neuron and the dendrite of the other neuron, which is referred to as a synapse. Now, for nerve impulses to pass through that small gap, there are chemical substances which are referred to as neurotransmitters, which then enable those impulses to pass through that small gap and then reach the next neuron. An example of such a neurotransmitter is a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. But you don't have to know the names of the neurotransmitters. It's just to give you an example. So that is how the impulses are transmitted from the one nerve to the other. Remember that your nerves are not connected together, but there is always a small microscopic gap between these two neurons, and that small gap is called a synapse, and the axon terminals release neurotransmitters into that gap, which then allow for the passing of impulses or the transmission of impulses into the other neuron. So that is how the neurons are passed. That is how the impulses are transmitted. So there's your labeling for the neurotransmitter, which is all those purple things there that are released from those burst vesicles. So that is all we need to cover for this question, section. It is only an introduction to the nervous system. So if you understand what we are talking about when we are talking about receptors? What are we talking about when we are talking about neurons? It will make it easier for you to understand the detail which you are going to learn in the sections that is coming up. So now let us look at some questions just to test if you have been listening and you know your work. So as I mentioned to you earlier, that one of the questions you must expect in the exam is the question that involves testing for your knowledge of terminology. So it is usually a question 1.2 in the exam or the test. Now it says give the correct biological term. Now it says biological term. You cannot give a common term for that. You need to give the correct biological term for each of the following description. Now the first one, 1.1, it says a part of the neuron that conducts impulses towards the cell body. Okay, I'm giving you time to think of that. A part of the neuron that conducts impulses towards the cell body. So the answer is definitely a dendrite. Second question, the microscopic space between two adjacent neurons is A or it is N, microscopic space. So that should be the synapse. 1.3, a change in the internal or external environment that will be detected by a receptor and converted into an impulse. So if something changes in your internal or external environment, that is referred to as a stimulus. A chemical substance which carries impulses across the synapse, it's a neurotransmitter. A part of the neuron that insulates the axon and it speeds up the transmission of impulses. That is referred to as the myelin sheath. Then another question, we've got two questions. This one is based on a diagram. Now here, if you look at that question, let's look at the diagram. It says the diagram below represents a possible path followed by an impulse when a person touches a hot plate. Now here you need to analyze the diagram so that you can understand which neurons are represented in that diagram. So without analyzing the diagram, you are going to be to battle to answer the questions. Now let us look at this diagram before we look at the questions, because that's what I always advise, is that you look at what is represented even before looking at what the questions is asking, so that you can understand what the diagram is showing you. Now here you can see we have got this neuron that is labeled B. And then we've got another neuron here that is labeled C. Then we have got the neuron that is labeled E. So there are three neurons there. Now remember the basic structure of the neuron is that it has got a cell body, which is that part, which has got the dendrites. And then on the other side, you have the long axon, which is covered by the myelin sheath, or which is insulated by the myelin sheath. And then at the end of the axon, you have got axon terminals. Right. Then you will see on this side, you have another neuron that is connected to F. So you need to be able to judge which hormone is, which neuron is attached to a receptor and which one is attached to an effector. Okay, so Let us look at the questions that are asked based on this diagram. First one, it says 2.2, identify the type of neuron that is represented by A, the letter B in the previous diagram. We will go back to the diagram. And then the one that is represented by the letter C. And the one that is represented by the letter E. Now let's go back to the diagram to see what was shown. So we are looking at these three neurons, B and E, and as well as C. For me, it's very easy to detect what is C, because C is the one that is connecting the two neurons. So therefore, C is a connector neuron, or it is the interneuron. Now we need to know or decide which one is connected to a receptor, which one is connected to an effector, so that we can know which one is a sensory neuron, which one is a motor neuron. Now for me, if I'm looking at this neuron, here's my cell body and here is my axon, and there is my whole neuron which is attached to A, and then on that side you have the this is an example of a motor neuron. If you look at the structure there, so B is going to be the motor neuron, and then E is an example of a sensory neuron, and therefore E will be F is therefore, if this is a sensory neuron, then it means that F is going to be the receptor and A is going to be the effector, which is going to bring about the change. So if we look at the answers for those questions in that order, so the neuron represented by B is the motor neuron, and the one that is represented by C is the connector neuron or the interneuron, and the one that is represented by E, it is the sensory neuron. Then next question says give the letter only of the part that represents the receptor and the part that represents the effector. Now in my diagram, if I want to go to the previous slide again, sorry that it is on the one slide. So I want the letter that represents the receptor and the one that represents the effector. So receptor is letter F, which is this one here, because we said E is a sensory neuron. And then the one that is the effector is A, because we said B is the motor neuron. So if you go there again for the answers, you will see receptor is F and effector is A. Then last question says give the letter and the name of the region where the impulse is transmitted chemically, and then the part that has an insulating function. Please pay attention to the way the question is asked. It says letter and name. So you start by giving the letter of the part and give the name. And in most cases, you get mark for the letter and you get mark for the name. All right. So please make sure that you answer it correctly. And then if you look at your diagram, the part where the impulse is transmitted chemically, it will be D, and that will be the synapse. And then the part that has an insulating function, it will be G, or it is the myelin sheath. So that is basically just the revision questions for this topic that we are doing together, but you will get a worksheet that accompanies this PowerPoint that you must then do now as your homework activity. So thank you very much, learners. You will be taken through by another teacher or presenter for the next lesson. So thank you so much, and keep on studying and keep on staying safe. at home during this time of COVID-19. Goodbye.